Hello everyone, welcome back to BlenderNest. This is episode 7. Unfortunately, Ducky can't be with us this time because he's off saving the world somewhere. But to make up for it, we've got Derek Elliott. And I should also say, as you might have noticed, Southern Shotty is also not here. He's really busy right now because you know he's a superstar in the work field. But now we've got Derek here. He's never been on the podcast before. I think we should give him a bit of time to introduce himself. So Derek, would you like to tell us what you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. But yeah, if you haven't seen me around, I'm Derek Elliott. My channel is the same name, and I make Blender tutorials, as you might assume, with me being here. But yeah, I have a background in industrial design, and a lot of that comes through in my work, as well as the Blender tutorials. So don't really have a specific topic or anything that I follow.
Well, I got a question for you. I was looking through some of your tutorials, and they're long. They're really long.
Yes.
They're like about an hour. Do you prefer making long format?
Not really. I mean, I think when I started my channel, I was dead set on like all videos being 10 minutes and under, just because I feel like that's the way I absorbed content the most. But I think as I was making tutorials, I was realizing more and more that like I really felt the urge, like I wanted to either finish a project more than just show a technique. So it really, like, I think that reason, and then a lot of the comments were centered around how things were thoroughly explained. So I started to do some that were like more in the 20-minute range, and then most recently the last few tutorials I was like, all right, I want people to be able to kind of start and then completely finish a project by the end of it, so that they just have something that they're proud of, because I think that's one of the, at least for me, it's like finishing projects is really important. So I kind of begun to realize that if you want to make something and it be cool, like it just sometimes it kind of takes that long, but it takes a lot of design to like come up with something that's kind of cool in the end, but isn't like ridiculously long. So I don't have a particular theory on how long they should be, but
I mean, Blender community would say like 30 seconds is what it should be, but I think long tutorials are the ones where you actually learn stuff. So you're doing the good work.
Yeah,
thank you.
We've spoken about this a little bit before, but we found that people want both generally, because the people that are subscribed to the short form content are also generally the people that are subscribed to the long form content. They'll just watch it at different times and for different reasons. So like, exactly. I wouldn't feel like too pressured to do one or the other, just whatever works for you and whatever you're comfortable with. But I do have a question as well, which is, when did you start doing videos for YouTube?
So it was in January, I think 2 years ago. So January, whatever that would be, January 2018 or something. Okay. I don't remember exactly, but I've actually been using Blender for about 13 years, since I was in high school. And kind of, I learned Blender from YouTube tutorials, so I always wanted to like finally give back. And I finally like bit the bullet, and after many years of wanting to do it, finally made a tutorial. And the first one was like super serious, and I was like, have to be extreme accuracy knowledge, and then they loosened up over time. But I think it's been about 2 years, very inconsistently making videos. It could be 3. I should probably be more familiar with that date. But it's been slow, up and down. Not a ton of videos.
I started on the same year. I think if you were 2018, I was 2018 October, I think. But really, the Blender community sort of exploded last year around the middle, when 2.8 sort of came out. That was a wave that took us all by surprise. But
I think it's a better time than ever. I mean, I've always been super invested in the future of Blender. I guess you can't say invested. I mean, I like donate to the fund, but I am very passionate about this kind of space it will occupy in the future. And I think 2.8 was probably a really good sign for everybody of just kind of just a leap forward, and especially you all having been in the space probably just started to see Blender a little differently. And I think for those same reasons, it definitely has grown. So
is Blender your primary software then? Is it? Do you use any others?
Not really. It's almost like, I don't want to call myself a fanboy, but I'm definitely like a Blender fanboy to a certain degree. I do use the Adobe Creative Suite just because that's kind of just what people use a lot, and I just have it, and the cost is justifiable. Mainly these days for After Effects, which I'm not doing very advanced things in at all. But I'm like adding text and like a vignette, things that I definitely could do in Blender. It's a familiar workflow for me. But Yeah, pretty much all Blender across the board.
You're the one who made the like pan to pot like transition thing, right?
That is correct.
That is so good. Did you make a tutorial on that like looping thing you did?
I was on the pot pan thing.
Yeah, it was top
Not
of the
yet.
subreddit for a good 2 days, I think.
Yes, it has been is been intensely requested, and I was actually just thinking today because it's probably been a little over a month since I put my last tutorial out, but that's the next one I have planned. And I was thinking that like if people watch this and then they like, oh, who's that guy? Go to his channel. Like I should have a video up. So I was actually thinking that I should try to coincide.
We have like
that
3
tutorial.
days then to get it done, I guess.
so yeah, you saying it takes you a day to get the podcast up after it's been recorded. I'm like, all right, that gives me enough time.
I mean, that would go over so much. That was like smoke simulation, probably shape keys. I mean, I have no idea how you did it in terms of just the geometry morphing.
That's one of the things I've been battling with. I mean, and this is a good case for the argument of like a longer tutorial versus shorter is, you know, I know that if I make the tutorial without the smoke, people will be asking about it. But one kind of specific detail with that is that I used the old smoke and now there's MantaFlow and everybody's making videos about that. And I haven't really played with it much. So I don't necessarily want to tell people a workflow that could potentially be outdated soon. But I also don't want to delay the release so long so that I can, you know, learn how to show people how to do it in MantaFlow. So I might do, and this is one thing I've been experimenting with tutorials is doing parts of the tutorial more as an overview of like how I did it, but not necessarily showing them how. So my current thoughts is that maybe I would just show the shape keys process, which is what it was, and then just kind of open up my original file and be like, hey, here's some of the settings. Wasn't too complex, but you know, watch you guys' videos on MantaFlow if you want to learn a more up-to-date, you know, process for that.
Smoke sims are so hard to make a tutorial about because you're like, okay, do this, and then you have to hit like bake, wait forever. Now you just adjust this tiny thing, and it's really hard to do live, that one.
Yeah. I haven't done much tutorials that had a lot of baking, but in the tutorials where there have been, even just with rendering, you get a lot of questions from people like, they'll message you their like computer specs and they're like, this render is taking a really long time. And it's like, you have to break it to them. It's like, yeah, like rendering takes a really long time and baking too.
Oh yeah.
So I wouldn't want to make people upset by having to bake a smoke sim.
Yeah. I remember when I did my smoke simulation tutorial, I thought, oh god, this is going to be really boring if it's just like the regular smoke sim tutorial where it's just the default Blender scene. It's got a cube, and then you make a little, you know, I thought, oh god, I can't do that. So what I did was I put a lot of effort into building a really pretty environment, and then just had this really simple smoke thing come out of the environment just to make it more interesting and to give it a better thumbnail. Seems to have worked. But as I say,
I like that approach. Like where, you know, the whole tutorial is really something bigger than that, but it's so that you can show, you know, one small thing, just so that there's still kind of sometimes people have trouble connecting the dots between like the technical skill in Blender and like how it could actually be applied. So I think, you know, that format is really helpful probably.
I'm curious, does anybody on this podcast know how to use MantaFlow? Anybody? Didn't think so.
I had downloaded an early release of Blender that had it in it, and I think I was going to use a regular smoke simulation, and I didn't even realize MantaFlow was included in that. And so I like saw it, and then I like played buttons, and it just like wasn't working. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna get away from that.
Do we even know like why it's better than like the default like Blender simulation that was already there?
Just gonna say it's capable of more things, more parameters as well. Maybe speed, better solver. It sounds cooler.
Yeah.
But this is for like smoke and fluid, or just
smoke and fluid? Yeah, both. Yeah. It's a bit shameful that I haven't played around with it, but I've just been doing other things. Because I'm running like 10, 20 projects at once. I'm behind on a lot of them. Like, and I'm really trying to squeeze out the next version of the Biogen update. But my god, that's taking time. We'll see.
Yeah,
any features you want to leak there? What's going to be new with Biogen?
No, not yet.
Just one thing to hook with.
Well, there's more modifier styles. They're the things that people have the most fun with, where they just click on objects and then they press a button and boom, it looks nice. But that's not always the stuff I'm interested in. The stuff that I'm interested in making is usually the stuff that people don't use. Like, for example, I wrote in the previous version this interpreter, which would turn the modifier stack of any object into a text object, which you could just give to someone else. And then if they had Biogen, they would just put it in the Blender text editor, push a button, and it would apply it to their object. That basically meant that you could transfer modifier data by text. And the feature that I forgot to put in, or I just couldn't be bothered because I ran out of time for the last one, was that you would be able to put a URL into the interpreter input field, so people could set up websites with databases of modifier styles. So they'd be able to put URL in, press it, and then it would change their object in Blender. I'm going to try and fit that into this one, but we'll see. But here's the thing, like, no one's using the interpreter. But I did it as a challenge because I thought, is that possible? Yes. Let's just have fun with it. So there's going to be some things in the next one that people like the basic things, the modifier things, and there's going to be a couple of things that are a bit more esoteric, but I really like them, and then maybe a couple of people will find it really exciting. But
you must have one of the most successful in terms of downloads add-ons for Blender, like other than like hard ops and stuff like that, which might not even have as many downloads because it's like really expensive.
Hard ops is so successful, but yeah, I don't actually know the number of downloads for them, but I think the Gumroad for Biogen has now passed 20,000.
Whoa.
Which is more than it was last time we checked, because I know we mentioned it on BlenderNest before. But that's just
you might have the most.
Maybe. Maybe we'll see.
I think you do.
It's got like nearly 1,000 ratings as well, most of them 5 stars and stuff. But like the problem is, where you see your own work through your own lens, and you see so many issues with it. Because I leave like trash code everywhere and like messages to myself inside of it. I'm like, oh god, it's such a mess. It's like clothes on the floor, not ironed or folded or anything. And then everyone's just like, picking up like hotcakes. But anyway, I digress. I'll stop.
If I look through the the Python files, will there like actually be comments in there of random stuff?
There's messages to myself. There's my logo in ASCII format, and then there's variables that don't do anything, but I have them just for fun. And there's like a variable called something like "I don't want to join your super secret boy band," which is a reference to Marvel. And so yeah, it's a mess. But also, just to move the conversation somewhere else, because I don't like talking about my stuff all the time. For anyone that doesn't know, in case you hear weird noises in the background, and there aren't many, so don't worry. CG Matter is streaming from a supermarket.
Should I explain the thing?
No, I'll explain. No. I'll explain it for you. He got lost. He got lost with a suitcase full of equipment, and he hasn't found his way out. That's why he's there.
Right. That's the whole explanation.
Okay.
That and he's prepping.
Yeah.
And maybe I can do every podcast from some random location, I don't know, so I can get something figured out. For those of you who don't know, I made a video ranting about like internet addiction, and to practice what I preach. That's why I ended up here.
There you go. I'll have to watch the video.
It's good self-development.
Yeah, it was basically me saying, like, I was talking about, on the last podcast, or maybe it was the bonus, we were talking about where you get inspiration from, and we also talked about, I think, procrastination, and I've kind of settled on the idea that I can get enough inspiration from in here, and that I'm just using Wi-Fi and all this as a distraction, maybe 90% of the time. So I moved recently, and this is a perfect time. I think I'm paying for Wi-Fi, but I never asked for the password. So this is a perfect time for me to try it out, and part of that means I need to record these from someplace that does have Wi-Fi.
I've noticed that there are some people looking as they're walking past. I want to like make signs, like just wave to them.
It's pretty small. It's possible they see you.
All right, should we get back on track?
I wonder what they think you do. If they're just seeing the back of your head and these 4 other
Probably looks like I'm doing like a business call or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, so there is something I wanted to talk about, because recently I've just started running a challenge on my Discord server. And the first one, the subject was Make Donuts Great Again, because as we all know, Blender Guru has the massively successful tutorial series for getting people into Blender, and it's centered all around this scene with a donut and a coffee cup, and you see it everywhere on the subreddits. In fact, the Blender subreddit has a rule, I believe, where you can't post those renders on there. You have to go to the Blender Donut subreddit. I might be wrong about that, but someone on my server told me that, so that's what I've heard. So there's a whole subreddit for that. So I ran a challenge on my Discord server called Make Donuts Great Again, and it was for people to basically make donuts more interesting. So don't do the regular scene, just do something different with it, and you get points for creativity. I posted that on Twitter. I linked Andrew Price, and he's seen it, he likes it, so that's good, job well done. But I was going to say, I believe you, CG Matter, you're doing a competition/challenge on yours. I think it's a monthly one.
The thing with that is the Discord mods are in charge of that. I'm supposed to vote, but I never look at it until it's like a bit too late. But there is a challenge if you head over there.
Yeah, and Grant Abbott, you have some on your Discord server as well.
Yep, we do a monthly competition. Well, in fact, one of my moderators, JB Blender, does a weekly one, and I do a monthly one, sort of a bigger one, if we call it that. And then I will show the results on a live stream.
Yeah,
that's the plan anyway.
So I was gonna first of all ask: have you yourselves ever taken part in a art-based competition?
I used to.
I've wanted to several times. Like there's Blender-focused ones. I know Zach Reinhardt, who most of us are familiar with. I know he had a big one going on Facebook for a long time, and I've always been tempted to enter something like that. I think in general they're really good, especially for people starting off Blender, because one of my biggest theories is that like. It can be really hard to continue on if you can't finish a project, if you're just caught up in this endless like folder of Blender files that are just kind of incomplete. So I think the idea of a competition is fantastic because there's a hard deadline. There's some rewards at stake in some cases, or at least notoriety as being the winner. But I haven't done a lot though. It's been a long time, I guess, at least.
I used to do them on CG Talk when that was a thing. Like a long time ago now. I don't even know if I think that site's still around, but I don't know if anyone's using it anymore. But they used to have these lighting competitions, and I used to post pretty frequently on those things. I used to post a scene and then say, light this thing. So I used to light it because it was fun, because I like lighting. And not that really shows up in most of my Blender tutorials, kind of an afterthought, but I kind of like, I love lighting. So that was a fun thing. And actually I had some guys from Mental Array comment once on it, which was really, really cool. So that was fun. Master Zap, I think the guy's name was on there. He was awesome.
Very nice.
Yeah, I think that's another big advantage of them is just, it gives you an opportunity to show your work off in a place where everybody's looking at it. Because, there's these portfolio sites that, your work can just always be available on to view, and you can direct people there. But in the case of a competition, it gets a lot of views kind of centered in one place at one time. So, if you manage to, have a piece that people are interested in or asking about a lot, it can be I think a good way to have kind of a concentrated, feedback session or just opportunity for you to have a little bit of a higher kind of place in the audience to just, have people directed towards your work or just be curious about what you did.
Yeah.
What's happening to that
dog? You see, we've got another member of the podcast now that's got a dog, so that's clickbait. We love animals.
Oh yeah.
What would Ducky want us to ask? What's new with Blender over the last week? Nothing's happened, right? Like all the new stuff has died down.
Oh, I tell you what, that cloth brush is still getting more attention. Yeah, we're on the same
it's been
wavelength.
integrated, not as like a branch. Now it's like 2.83. It's in there.
Yes, lots of people loving that, even outside the community as well.
Yeah, that cloth brush thing is really, really cool. You guys have done tutorials on it, and I'm loving the new cloth features. I just has been playing around with cloth and internal springs and just doing some really crazy, nasty looking stuff, and it's just really, really fun.
Tell me, what's the difference between using cloth with the internal springs versus soft body? Because it looks like it does the same thing, no?
Similar. For me, it seems to be solving faster, and the internal springs kind of hold the volume, and it's more like using. To me, it's more like using finite element solving in Houdini. So I kind of can conceptualize it a bit better than just the normal soft body stuff. And I'm just kind of really liking it. So I haven't figured out exactly like what makes it different in Blender than the normal soft body engine that's existed forever. Although it seems to be a bit faster for me and more intuitive, and I'm just kind of really liking where it's going.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of redundancy. Like the cloth covers soft body. I guess it also covers rigid body if you put a bunch of stiffness.
It does, yeah.
But they're literally doing different things, right? Like the way it calculates. Like rigid body will calculate like a cage around it or something.
Yeah. Whereas this is like, the internal springs hold its volume, so it's kind of like an inside out type stiffness. But it is really cool, and I've been playing around with it, just making this like undulating stuff, and it's just fun. I don't know.
I've seen lots of examples of the new pressure system with the cloth simulation on Twitter now. A lot of people catching up with it. Looks really, really cool.
Yeah.
That's with the sculpting tools. There's pressure sensitivity plays into that.
Well, I was talking more about the cloth simulation because there's these new settings to get, pressure. Or
Oh
that's the only
yeah,
way to
I
put
saw
it,
you had a
really.
video on that.
So that's really interesting. But that cloth brush is really sort of changing the way I think about making cloth type objects now. Because I don't really see a use case for me for using actual cloth simulation anymore. Because where I would usually use it would be for clothing or for like hard surface cloth elements, like padding on the side of stuff. And really,
Like at
I
Space Station.
yeah, exactly. And I only really need to use the cloth brush for that now.
Is the cloth brush something that it sounds like ZBrush has that as a feature? Is that right? Or something else that's not like a?
I think what's like really like the big deal about it is it's a new idea to have like a physics solver inside a brush. I mean, it's not entirely new. Like these things have existed before, but as far as I know, this is just like maybe a Marvelous Designer thing, but I don't think it's in ZBrush.
Well, yeah, I'm so like, painfully out of tune with a lot of the other softwares. So I wasn't sure if, how common that was because yeah, it's extremely impressive. Like when I saw that, I was thinking kind of like you mentioned, Curtis, for what I would typically need something like that for, it just doesn't make sense to really go through the process of a full cloth simulation. So, and it seemed to be getting a lot of attention from, non-Blender communities as well. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about, the impact that has or kind of what the larger picture is in terms of, Blender having that as a tool. Like, is that on its own something that people would, seek out in Blender that they're not able to get somewhere else? Just kind of thinking about those things.
Yeah, I'm really not that sure actually. I mean, I haven't seen it in many other softwares, but I can't speak on behalf of ZBrush because I haven't used a full ZBrush package at all. I mean, I think I've only really used Core before, like the trimmed down version of it. So I'm not sure, but it is interesting seeing more and more softwares moving towards a sort of physically based real-time simulation workflow for doing brush type things, because especially with Substance Painter, I don't know how many of you have used it, but you have the particle brushes, so it simulates particles hitting the object, and then you can do things like streaks of grease or rain coming down the object as well. So that's really cool. So I expect
that's like pretty similar to dynamic paint, right?
Yeah,
in a way.
So I expect we're going to probably see more and more of that in the future, as well as, of course, all these other AI improvements like, denoising as well. But
speaking of Substance, we mentioned it before we started recording. Anybody want to like break down Quixel and like how maybe Adobe's going to get overthrown potentially? Anybody know about the whole Quixel
I'm not
stuff?
familiar with
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, didn't I, about Quixel Mixer, but I don't know much about it. Lots of people have been asking me, can you do a video on it? But so I've got to check it out. But lots of people have been saying, oh, is this the Substance Painter killer because it's free? But I don't think it's anywhere near that yet. And there's sort of free versions of things, and it can link in with Unreal and Megascans stuff and things.
yeah.
I'm sort of just pulling the things I've heard so far, but I really want to have a go with it.
Yeah, I feel like I would know more about the whole Quixel software suite, but it's been confusing because I think they've had a bit of an identity crisis over the last few years. Because I remember using Quixel Suite, which was a 3D like object texturing suite, among other things. You could like create normal maps and do other stuff, but it was 3D texturing inside of a 3D window inside of Photoshop. And that was confusing for me to start with because you had to get Photoshop and then you had to have the Quixel Suite and then it would open in there like a plugin. But then that disappeared. It just went off the map. And then all of a sudden they didn't like have a 3D painting suite anymore because I think they let Substance grow and do their thing. So I was always sitting here thinking, okay, what's Quixel's 3D painting thing now? And now with Quixel Mixer, which was more just for creating textures, mixing them together with parameters and stuff, has now integrated a 3D object painting system. And I thought, okay, well, that's where it's gone. They've clearly reintegrated it now, and now it's a free software standalone rather than like a plugin for like Photoshop. So yeah, that seems to be what's going on. I need to look more into it because that sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah, the main draw for like the Quixel stuff for me is the Megascan library. I saw a tutorial about, I think it was in Unreal. So they were making a video game. And they were making a forest in like, they don't just say forest in 10 minutes and then cut it like a Ian Hubert tutorial. They literally just hit record, made it in 10 minutes, hit stop record. They made a whole forest in a game in 10 minutes, which is only possible because there's already all these like photogrammetric scans and stuff like that. Whereas I feel like what Substance is doing now is more like, I think somebody mentioned AI stuff where you can literally just, I don't know if you guys have seen this, you take a photo of like a wall or something, You put it through Substance, and it will generate a material, it will generate normals and all this. Hopefully somebody didn't already mention this.
Not here, no.
So they're going in like very, very different directions, because I guess they're both kind of sort of related to 3D painting, but one's more like streamlining video game production, and this other one's going into AI everything. They even have the other than the AI thing I already said, you could do a material, you could make a material, and you could have it generate 10 similar materials, and it will just do some kind of AI idea generation. I don't know what they call that.
What do you guys think the most ideal like material creation process is? Would it be like based on reality where things are being scanned and you're getting accurate maps out of that? Or do you think, the ability to do it kind of more procedurally and, have complete control and design over the materials? I guess it might depend on like what you're doing. Like, I guess if you're wanting to accurately reproduce something specific, maybe the photo-based approach would be better. But, procedural, you obviously have more control. Would you guys have an opinion on like what the what's better, what the ideal workflow for one over another would be?
I'd always like to be able to paint and adjust, and I find procedurally based, you can obviously do that with sort of alpha overlays and all sorts, but it's nice to be able to have that sort of painting option. That's what I always like to do, and I find the sort of stylized look isn't so good from procedurally based stuff, whereas when you can actually paint on it yourself and add that sort of stylized texture, it's much nicer to be able to paint personally.
So you mostly make like mobile like game or like video game asset type stuff, which is why you're doing like the hand painting. Do you think there's ever going to be like this procedurally generated more like cartoon style material library, or do you think that's always going to be something that's hand done, like the same way like Disney animations, the 2D ones used to all be hand done?
Yeah, I think I suppose everything's going to go sort of procedurally based and, in fact, AI based eventually. But I think that's the one that's going to be the hardest for a machine to imitate, because it's there already in a sense. You can highlight the edges and do cavity masks and things, and therefore lighten the edges, darken the crevices, and so forth, which is pretty much essentially what you do with a hand painting. But to get that look, that sort of rough look of hand painted style, it really doesn't do it. And sort of painting in reflections and things like that, it's quite tough to procedurally do that. So it's going to be a while before it can do that. I think that's going to be the hardest thing for AI, as it were, and procedural based stuff to hit, is that sort of stylized base, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it's really going to come down to the project and the art direction, where you're going to have the stuff that's the visual effects stuff that has to be photorealistic is going to be is going to take off in that AI probably direction. And I think the stylized stuff where you see the explosion of this is going back a few years, Team Fortress, and then there's Fortnite, where it looks completely stylized and cool, where it's more artsy and has a much deeper human touch than the stuff that's just going to be let's recreate reality and do that in the visual effects realm, so we can blend reality with our vision, and that avatar type stuff where there's going to be a hybrid of that. And I think that's where those two things are going to mix in that sort of environment where you're creating this completely fantasy world, but it adheres to kind of the real world ethos that we're used to seeing, but it's not. It's a hybrid mix of both, and that's, I think, the nexus where it's going to come together. But I think on the two sides, you'll have definitely the art direction of this needs to be photorealistic versus this is more human painted type stuff, where you're always going to have the humans in the mix to do those types of projects.
Yeah, I almost feel like there's like an order of operations there, where a lot of times, to arrive at kind of that really advanced procedural type thing, a lot of times it's kind of maybe based on something that's been done by hand before, and they're looking for a faster way to do that. So it becomes, you start to really look at what makes something stylized, or what's happening visually here that gives it that look. And then, people can really start to break that down and try to kind of recreate that with code. So it's almost like a lot of times you see things as handmade art type of thing first, and then over time, there becomes ways to do that procedurally. I mean, at its very base level, I think it's something like freestyle, where you just you wouldn't get that like inked outline look typically with 3D processes, but people want that, so they invest time in figuring out ways to create similar looks that are much faster than doing it by hand.
Yeah, and going back to the whole texture painting using like the scans and stuff for photorealism, when it comes to stylization, especially with video games and stuff, it's often half the shader and half the textures creating the effect, whereas with photorealism you have like a one mega shader, like, you know, the principal BSDF, and then it all relies on the maps. So that's all raw data, you know, coming from real life to make it look realistic. But with stylization, if you think of like, you know, the Spider-Verse film, how it's like comic book style but 3D, but there's texture data, but there's like these half tone effects going on. Half of it is like shader, like procedurally done based on the camera or based on world space, and then another half of it is data from textures, like guiding where effects should be and stuff like that. So for an AI-based system in the future to, you know, be effective for both realism and stylization, it needs to be like rooted in a shader platform as well at the same time.
For the people who need the technical stuff, texture versus shader versus material versus, I don't know what else there is. Closure. Nobody knows what a closure is. Can you like define the differences there?
Okay, so it also varies by software package and graphics platform and stuff, but your shader is like a program. It's like a script that describes how the object should look, just to put it extremely simply, like how light should react with it, how it should look in response to the camera positions and world position and stuff like that. So it's like a script, like a regular program has a script which tells it what to do, like Blender's made up of scripts. A material is like a container for the shader where the parameters can be adjusted and you can plug things into it. So, like, if you're familiar with creating materials in Blender, then you already have that concept in your mind. You know, you create the materials, and then inside the node tree for that material, you can add different shaders and mix them around. They're like different scripts, and you can play with how they interact with each other. Texture is usually 1:1 ratio, but it's not all the time, so just forget that. It's a collection of data points which represent pixels, again usually, that you can use as data to tell the shaders what to do. So with the example of Blender again, a lot of the time we use the principal BSDF shader inside of materials. And of course you have the base color or albedo or however you pronounce it, and you have the metalness values and the roughness values that describe how metallic or how shiny something should be. And you can plug in mathematical values to those if you want, but you can also plug in texture maps. And that gives you a lot more control over getting things to look realistic if you wanted, for example. Or you can paint those maps in other softwares as well to get the exact look that you want. So if you're doing a piece of armor and you want it to look more metallic over certain areas, then you could paint that map in another software or in Blender, and then you could plug that map into the shader inside your material, and it would get that effect over the object that the material is applied to. So hopefully that's a good enough explanation.
I was just going to say, it's definitely a really complex topic, and I think it's something I was scared of for a long time when I was learning. Like, there was one point where I guess cycles just became more of a thing than Blender Internal, and maybe Blender Internal didn't work that way, but for the longest time I was like, once I have to use nodes in Blender, like, it's done. Like, I'm getting out. I'm not going to be able to handle that. But yeah, like, once you figure out kind of like what Curtis was saying about the, just how maps work, and that's literally what it is. It's a map. It's like, it's a guide to where things are and go. And, one of the things I find myself repeating in my tutorials a lot when it comes to shading is that, just understanding the notion that, black is a value of 0, white is a value of 1. Like, you just like repeat that in your head. And once you realize that, then you play with these sliders, you start to realize it's like, okay, well then, if black on the map is 0, white is 1, and then you can, understand just how roughness works in general. You can start to see or like make the connection of like what's actually happening here. And then once you start to grasp those concepts, it becomes a lot easier to play around more, because once you understand how it works.
So what blew my mind, tell me if this is not true. Is it true that PBR was only like developed for Wreck-It Ralph, which is like a 2014 movie? I heard that like pre that they were making like a bunch of texture sets, one for the character in night, one for in day, depending on what environment they're in.
Yeah,
I'm sure that when they were developing it, they realized that the implications would go far beyond just that movie. But I have also
they needed it just for Wreck-It
Ralph. Yeah, who did it come from?
I have heard that.
Was it Pixar? Because I can't quite remember.
It was feature animation.
Feature animation.
They did it here in Burbank. But yeah, it's that's a good question. I don't know if they developed PBR for that film, but Yeah, that film was pretty wild. The lighting and the shading, it was really really good. Especially that Candy, what was that? Candy
The
Crush or whatever
racing,
that was.
yeah.
Yeah. That. Oh man. Yeah.
So you're telling me 6 years ago and before they were making multiple different like texture sets or materials for different environments just 6 years ago?
Yeah.
It sounded like it wasn't just that, but that they were having to adjust them. So it wasn't so much that they had to do a map for everything. It's just in certain cases, like colors weren't behaving properly in one lighting versus another. So I think wasn't necessarily that they were just having to do like double work for, night and day, but there just was always like inconsistency. Like things just weren't looking, and they were having to tweak materials. Whereas, if you're working in a physically based like setup, you should be able to have, as you control lighting scenarios, the material should behave, in a realistic way, because that's what it's kind of all based on.
Yeah.
Or at least that's my understanding of it. I think Andrew Price had a video where he talked about the whole Wreck-It Ralph thing. So that's my number one source for information. So that's
those like PowerPoint presentation tutorials he does are so good.
Yeah.
They are.
Yep.
It's like physical based rendering, and I know that Disney wrote for what was it? Man, I can't remember the name of it. They wrote a renderer called the Hyperion renderer. That's what they're calling it, and it's a physical based rendering engine that they're using for, I guess, most of their stuff now. And they wrote it for the movie, or they actually premiered it on oh man, what was that? The big white puffy thing?
Big Hero 6.
Thank you, Big Hero 6. I don't know why it escaped my mind, but yeah, I think that was the first one that they used that, and there's a whole physical based workflow, I guess, that they used on that. But I think they were using RenderMan before that, and that had some physical based characteristics as well. But I think they like wrote that engine specifically so that it could just, real world lighting is just calculated throughout everything, and all the shaders and everything is kind of uniform and propagates through the whole thing, and makes it much easier for everybody to work on a very cohesive and consistent shot by shot basis.
Do you guys think that will reach a point where there's just even play between the softwares, where like the underlying principles of just how materials and things work in the real world are closer to one with what we see in CG, where it just wouldn't even make sense that there's different file formats, because like all the data inputs will be exactly the same? I mean, I feel like we're getting there, but
it's gotten better. There's still like a bit of a divergence between like metallic roughness and spec gloss people. I feel like Substance Painter probably lets you use both, but I think most people probably use metal roughness, and I think there's probably been a bit more convergence. I know like right now there's like, if you use V-Ray, you have to make your materials one way. If you use Octane, you have to make them another. Actually, what's standard? What's like the leading thing that is compatible with most stuff?
Good question.
I'm not sure. I was just get that invert node ready to go.
Yeah, if you use V-Ray, it works relatively cohesively across different platforms. I've seen it in production, and it works pretty well. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm seeing Redshift happening, but yeah, V-Ray has been kind of the mainstay.
Yeah, those DirectX OpenGL normals.
What else do you guys think are big factors that would keep or that are like separating softwares from each other? Because that's with my intense focus on Blender, like I always kind of talk about how like Blender used to not be able to do everything, but back when I started using it, I didn't need it to do everything. I was using it for like my friends' band logos and stuff like that, and then now I do need it to do a lot. I'm using it professionally, and it does most of those things. So I haven't like ever had to kind of switch off, but throughout that process of, people saying Blender can't do this, can't do that. I mean, what other things, not just in Blender in general, but just in general CG workflows, like what do you think are things that are keeping softwares apart, whether it's, like material systems like we talked about, or, modeling, or is it armatures? It's like, what are the disconnected pieces still in you guys' opinions?
Well,
transferring. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, like, there's always been an issue with Cartesian coordinate positions as to what way is up. Like, in this day and age, we can't agree on it between softwares. You think this is something we should have figured out in like the Greek ages, pick a letter and let's go. That always causes a problem, and you see that when you go to export in certain formats, you have to choose which axis is up, and that always causes problems for armatures and rigs and stuff like that. But that's just a small thing, that's something that we could figure out in a day if we wanted to. And other than that, yeah, I mean, mesh data is really easy to transfer between file formats, so I don't think we're limited there in any way. Texture data is, again, really easy to transfer. One of the bottlenecks is rigging in animations, because not all formats can support that, only very specific ones can. And FBX is definitely one of the most popular for transferring animations. It's not the only one, but it's one of the most popular. And the problem is that FBX is not really an open format, so that causes some issues. And I know that Ton has spoken a bit about that in a previous interview before. I don't know if he spoke about it with the Andrew Price interview. I'm just recalling something there. Might be worth a watch. I think we've definitely made a lot of progress between that, translation between the formats, but there's still a little way to go. And we're seeing more pop up, like the GLTF format, is that a new name?
And USSD as well.
Yeah, USD.
Yeah, USD is going to be big, and Alembic has been really good.
So there's definitely improvement,
Yeah.
I'd say that caches and simulations have been an issue for a long time. Actually, although recently there has been, I think in 2.83, a way to import OpenVDB. I don't know what I'm talking about, but you simulate something in Houdini, you can import it into Blender. That's a thing now.
Yeah,
volumes. Yeah, it's awesome.
That's another note, actually, because as new graphics technologies are created, then we need more ways of storing that data, like serializing it, moving it across other pieces of software. So I think as we're designing new techniques, we need to be more considerate of how we're going to transfer those techniques between softwares, or the data created by those techniques between softwares, because things are quite arguably getting more complex now, especially with AI type technologies. And there's going to be more high level points of data to store rather than just raw data. If you imagine a machine learning system that's learned from a data set, how do you store what it's learnt, and how do you index that, and how does that translate to other formats and stuff like that? So I imagine there's probably going to become a job around just managing all of that, inventing formats or inventing ways to convert things. And I don't know, we're breaching into really high level areas here, because it's all talking about the differences. If we are talking about AI technologies and stuff like that, there's absolutely no standard whatsoever for it. I don't know.
I wonder if that's what creates a lot of these issues, is that any new technology starts off as kind of a fledgling thing in many different places, and there's no discussion between the people working on it. And that over time, as that popularizes, there's all these disconnected pieces, and nobody wants to go the other person's way. So that's a good point you bring up about AI, is that there's massive amounts of data being collected, organized, and just managed. And I'm sure that someone who's in that field is familiar with how they do it and maybe how some others do it. But as that becomes more popularized, or something that more people have their hands in, that's probably going to be a big issue. Would be how do we talk about that data, or reference it, or use it in a way that other people can use it as well? Because especially with an open source project, you want to be able to share that and work together. Not necessarily that it would be open source, but definitely an interesting point you bring up.
Pipeline people are going to be very busy.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the thing about data is, and I'll just bring this back to my description of materials, shaders, textures, etc. Data is data at the end of the day. So when we were talking about how plugging in texture maps, into shaders just to help control it, you could get exactly the same effect, exactly the same, without the texture map, if you hard coded the values for the individual pixels and then plugged them in. It's exactly the same. So with that in mind, data is data. It doesn't matter what context you're looking at it in. With AI type things, a lot of people might look at AI type techniques being used to generate textures, for example, and go, okay, well, this is strictly an artistic thing. It's learning from a data set and then it's generating these, and this is just an art thing, and it has no connection to the outside world whatsoever. But the techniques being used to learn from a data set and generate something could be the exact same techniques used to simulate neurons in a completely different system. The exact same algorithm could be used to do different things. So it's not developments in the field of graphics are completely separate from the outside world. And there are calls in the outside world, if we want to put it that way, to standardize the development of AI technology. And I recommend reading Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, because they talk quite a bit about that in there. But it's just interesting to keep in mind, because when we're talking about this whole standardization of file format systems, we may need to start a discussion with other industries about this as well. Not just those that are interested in like 3D graphics specifically, but like medical simulations, stuff like that. How do we transfer data between these different types of softwares? So yes.
No, that's actually a really good point, and like a perfect example of like oversight. Just even in my last comment, that I'm thinking like, oh yeah, between AI, they need to have a common data format. And here we are. There's like in Photoshop alone, you could say about like 40 different file formats. So like, yeah, forget just 3D data. I mean, I was starting to think about it like, it would also be nice if like CAD data, I do some product visualization work. It'd be really nice if there was, a little bit more overlap between CAD data and mesh data, because, nowadays a lot of times they need to do similar things. Like, you need to take the product and you either have it be part of an AR experience or just be able to send it to someone like me so I can render it and make it look nicer than it does in the SolidWorks viewport. But you're right. It's like, it's way bigger than just, what the data is. But like you said, at the end of the day, it's just data. So it'd be like, I wonder if there will be a time in the future where you just get like a dot file, and like, it could be a text document, it could be a 3D data, and there's like this universal viewer that just views anything. It's probably far in the future.
Actually, Right Hemisphere was a company that was pioneering some really good translation tools, and they could easily take grep data and translate into polygonal data, and it was really, really nice. And then they were bought by SAP, and now it's called like the SAP Product Visualizer Enterprise or something like that. Something the human can't remember, but it's still available and it's really awesome. And they used to have a base package. It was super cheap, but they had to pay for the licensing for all of the different CAD packages like CATIA and Pro Engineer and just a bunch of them, and SolidWorks. And so that price point just jumped up, but it was a really great translation package to be able to take CAD data and bring it into programs like Blender or Maya or Max or Houdini or whatever, and use it in an art package. And it did a pretty nice translation job. It wasn't too heavy, and you could retopologize where you wanted to, but it was really nice. And I think that market space is pretty wide open now for anybody who wants to write translation tools that'll, especially going from the industrial stuff to the art stuff. I think there's an opportunity there for any enterprising people.
Yeah, I think somebody just really sat on that, played with like step files and could bring them into Blender or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, the step files were a great translation, and you could take any of that stuff and just translate it. It was awesome. But I think that's a blue ocean right there, man. I think that's a wild, wide open space right now.
If anybody, Curtis, I'm looking at you. You got the next Gumroad add-on. I'll download that one. Sure.
Yeah, see. I do actually.
I become a wizard.
I have some experience. Yeah, I have some experience in writing file formats and parsing them. I find it quite fun, but we'll see. There's room for it. But I think we're coming to the close of the episode now. But I do have one question, which is a lot more philosophical, which I want to throw to you. So get your hats on. It's has having a YouTube channel changed the way you see the world in any way? Like personality-wise, like idea-wise, like ideology, whatever. Is there an answer?
Yeah, for me, it's changed the way I think about teaching, because I was a full-time teacher before starting the YouTube, and just to look at the different ways of teaching through the internet. I feel like education is way behind, and sitting in a classroom with these kids, and I'm teaching games design, so 90% of them are really loving it, but still it's quite hard. And still there's that 10% that don't want to be there, or don't want to continue it. And you just sort of, I'm wondering what I'm doing sometimes in the classroom. Hopefully none of my colleagues are watching this. But and then I start thinking about actual society and what teaching really is. And it gets very philosophical at that point about actually schools are just there for childcare. And in reality, we could do schooling through the internet much more successfully, and kids could be looking at things that they really want to learn and going down avenues that they really want to, rather than having to sit in front of in line, in rows, in front of a whiteboard or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So yeah, for me, it's hugely influential in the way I've been thinking about my career paths and teaching in general.
Anyone else?
I feel like for me, it taught me a lot about attention span and what holds people's attention. It's a pretty negative realization, because the one number I find most important is average view retention. And I've gone to the point where I have nearly 100% view retention with everything I make. And the reason is,
Wow.
what I think you probably already know, what gets people's attention is overflowing them with information a lot of the time and not giving them time to process. Whereas, like, I know it's definitely not the most effective way to teach, but since I have this thing plus the default Cube channel where there's like 20-minute tutorials where there's no jokes, I just talk for 20 minutes. It's pretty sad what grabs people's attention, and that's the realization I had. But of course, you could use this information for good, right? You could innovate how you teach kids. Like, for example, I don't know if people are for or against this, but at least in the US, there's a big debate about whether or not you can or you should bring iPads and tablets into classrooms. That's a thing in a lot of states, because I think it makes kids want to learn, but they're also not going to be paying attention. They're going to be doing whatever on their iPads. But yeah, that's the main realization I've had, attention span.
All right.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. I've a mix between what Grant said and what CG just said. One of the biggest things that happened when the upswing for 2.8 came out was I guess I'm calling it the Ian effect or the CG Matter effect, which you can say, around the same time kind of launched up, and you realize, like, wow, like you guys like will release a video and they're funny. I mean, they're honestly, like, I think you and Ian and the other people doing this, like, it's hilarious. I mean, you wonder, like, wow, like, you start getting all these comments, but like they're not like learner focused comments. And I got them too when I started doing that, and then I kind of backed off because I got too many negative comments, and I was just kind of like, I'm not really that funny. But like I was like, wow, it's almost like there is this meme culture out there that exists on the internet, and like the shorter stuff, even if it's really good, and your videos are awesome. They do. If you watch it like 5 times in a row, you're going to pick it up and you're going to understand what's going on. But the attention span, just like, wow, they want 1 minute, and you start reading those comments like, I wish all school was like this. I'm like, that's cool if you're a great learner, but I also had the people coming in going, oh, there goes another channel falling into hell, and oh man, here we go. Like, they want the 20 minutes, they want each detailed piece, and there's definitely a dichotomy there. I mean, there are the people, like we said in the beginning of this video, this podcast, where there are people who want the longer format, and then there's the people who just kind of want the shorter, kind of joke stuff. And you finding that balance and finding the people in the middle who want to learn, is kind of a trick. It's like fishing. It's like, what kind of bait do you use? Because you're going to catch different fish with different bait. And is that the fish you want or not? I don't know. And so that's what was great about what CG is doing when you went the fast route, and then you create a default cube for the learners. It's awesome because you can I've seen you like take a core group of people from the CG Matter channel and port them to the default cube, and you get the learners on the default cube channel, and it's like having your cake and eating it too. So it's kind of a good mix. And then in the classroom, watching the way to teach, like Grant has been teaching. I taught for 4 years at college level too, and I'm like, trying to figure out a lesson plan with YouTube available now is changing everything. Like, if I went back to teach now, I would have to revamp instructional design to the point where I would have to really pay attention to how people learn and what they're learning on YouTube versus what I'm teaching in the classroom, and can I even keep their attention in the classroom? It's changed. It's changed a bit of my outlook. So I'll stop here. You guys can go on.
I like the idea of like homework being, hey, can you watch this video and then this video and then this video and then this video for me, and then come into the next lesson?
Just to add my little tidbit to Curtis's original question. Yeah, I mean, I think teaching obviously in general, theories on that, but just I think having the channel in general has just opened up my eyes to really how powerful just the internet is in general as a way to connect people and share information. And just the fact that I'm able to spend 13 years learning Blender, soaking up all this knowledge and stuff, and that I'm able to live with just a couple hours of my time, able to deliver something that can be watched hundreds of thousands of times by so many people. And just like, I mean, people learn from each other. So just, YouTube as a platform and the internet in general as just a way to just to share information and to get it to someone in a way that might be more digestible for them. And I think that also, that point kind of also goes with, how we all have our different styles and stuff with teaching, and how, like, I forget who said it first, but like the idea that if you know more than one person, you should be teaching, because, just everybody has, something to add to the discussion. And it's just amazing to, like I said, I learned Blender from YouTube. So being able to do that to more people and just kind of accelerate, just people's knowledge of things in general. And then, my passion of 3D just as kind of a tool for communication at its base level, just being able to get that in the hands of more people, and, just allowing people to be able to use that form of expression that they might otherwise be afraid of if there weren't people like us, sharing that information. I'm curious to hear your answer to your own question too, Curtis.
Well, I haven't actually thought about it that much, because I just wrote this down before the episode. But I'm sure if I had 2 days, I'd be able to write some like really impressive thing that everyone would go, "Wow, that's wow, how clever!" But no, in all seriousness, I think the thing that's changed my worldview after having a YouTube channel is realizing how absolutely terrible YouTube is for giving you a sense of other people in the world. Because I'll explain. So, before I put videos out, like, you think, okay, if people watch it, then that will feel great. I'll get a feeling that people are watching it. But people watching your content doesn't feel like anything. Like, you don't realize people are watching it if you're not looking at the stats. It doesn't change, your life in any way. It doesn't sound like anything. You don't wake up feeling any different. And that's also a problem, because the statistics sort of dehumanize the human aspect of it, if that makes sense. And also, like, reading comments, it's just text. Like, you don't hear the person's voice. You don't get a sense of their emotions, their like moral compass, like what they're interested in, their life situation, whatever. So it almost just feels like it's a bot talking to you, So that's why I really like comments that are like well thought out and reference things that even I've forgotten about that I said, and then they put their twist on it. Because, like, we always hear that, oh, this is a really good video comment, but once you see that comment like 1,000 times, it loses its impact. You know what I mean? So I'm always like trying to look for ways to get that humanity fix, if you will. And I think going to like the Blender conference in October was really nice. I think it was October, unless I'm getting mistaken. I'm mixing up my times. It was really nice because, like, you actually get to speak to people, and then, like, that's the first time I ever had someone come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm a fan. Do you want to get a picture?" Because then you can put a face to it and a personality, and then they tell you about the things that they enjoy. So I think I'm still trying to figure out how to bring more humanity into it, because I feel like that's going to be a really strong motivator for continuing to make content in like the following years. Because if it's just numbers, and you grow and grow and grow, I think I might lose some motivation. So we'll see. That's just something that I've learned and something that I want to keep an eye on. But if anyone has any ideas for how to like bring that back, but one thing that
I wonder if, like, not to drag on the conversation too long, because I know we're past the hour, but yeah, I wonder if it's almost a YouTube specific issue. Maybe there's a different way to present it, because I did actually have someone one time. Instagram has a voice record feature now, and somebody actually sent me like a 2-minute thing where they were talking about my tutorial and like thanking me, and yeah, it was like flooring to hear someone's voice, because like you said, you read all the comments, but there's not a lot of personality there. I mean, you can have their little profile picture, but I do think, in short, that there is a better way, and I wonder what that would be.
Yeah, I will say one thing that does help, because not to be too cynical, because I do love doing YouTube, but it's just one thing I've noticed. But one thing that does help is having the Discord server. And like, because I've been speaking to people on there for months, and I've made friends with, a lot of the really strong community members, but only just recently we started talking in voice chat, and it just adds this whole extra layer of personality to them. Like, as soon as you hear their voice, I'm like, wow, I've been talking to you for months, but now like suddenly there's a better connection. I wonder like how different we would feel if we could have a connection with absolutely everyone that watched the videos. That'd be completely overwhelming. Because no human it's designed for that, but like, I bet it would like change the way we make content, and how we respond to people, and even how they respond to you. Because we know that a lot of the mean comments we get of, people that really don't expect you to respond anyway. I'm sure that a lot of us have had situations where someone said something mean, then you've replied, and then they've suddenly changed. Like they've gone, "Oh, sorry, I'm fine."
Yes.
So
yes.
if that element can be solved, then I think maybe YouTube will look very different. That's where I'll leave it. I'll stop.
That was a great question.
All right. So I think that'll do. We've just passed an hour, I think, according to my recording.
According to the recording.
Yes. So thank you for watching. I'm sure Ducky and Southern will be back as well. And Derek, thank you very much for joining us. It was lovely to have you. And
anytime. Thanks for having me.
Everyone should go and check out his channel. And of course, you have an Instagram as well, which I believe is Derek J. Elliott. Is that right?
Yes. Elliott with 2 L's and 2 T's. Though I hope by now, if you get to that far, the algorithm gods bless me and you'll fill the rest in automatically.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, your stuff is really good. I really like watching it. So I recommend anyone watching this go check out his channel. Like it's quality.
It's very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
you
I'm
made
fans
that
of all
pod pan
in case that
tutorial.
was never mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. And one more thing we mustn't forget: subscribe to the Patreon, because there's exclusive episodes that get put up on there. We've done one so far. I believe it's excellent. It's a masterpiece. Honestly, it's the best thing we've ever done. And
You are missing out you're missing out a whole layer of all of us.
Yeah.
You're not. It's kind of like the comment thing. You don't really know what we're like unless you join the Patreon.
yeah, and if word of mouth isn't enough, then me and CG Matter are wearing sunglasses throughout the whole thing. So
I'm wearing 2 pairs, I think. That one.
Yeah.
and you will never
You
see
get
that anywhere
Wayfarers.
else. Okay, let's just cut it off here. Okay, bye everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.